the head priest at Richmond Zen. He's practiced Zen for over 30 years. We have received his precepts from Josho Phelan Sensei. At Chapel Hill Zen Center. He has taught in Richmond. He's in many ways he served as a Buddhist campus minister at University of Richmond. Meditation. I guess I will stop. Okay, anything else? You feel free to say more.
Yeah. Well, good morning. I'll start with this bow. This is a bow that I learned. It sort of seems to start and end everything in Zen. We call it a Gasho bow. And I call it the Zen aloha. And we used to say hello, goodbye, thank you, I'm sorry, wow. It mean a lot of things, and usually you don't need to say anything with it. It can just be the expression just sort of comes through. And not anything woo-woo there, just we are much more attuned to each other than we know. Sometimes just a bow can say all you need to say. And a lot of our Zen practice, the forms that we have are meant to help settle us down, calm our minds, settle us in, so we can kind of, Thich Nhat Hanh loves to say, touch deeply our true nature. I want to thank Susan and Ben for inviting me. It was really wonderful to come on down from Richmond and see so much interest in Buddhism and Dharma, and a little bit more about myself in case you don't know. I don't know how familiar you are with Buddhism and the great variety, 31 flavors and more in Buddhism, but I practice in a Soto Zen tradition, which is traced from in my lineage from my teachers trained with Shunryu Suzuki, who founded the San Francisco Zen Center in the 60s. And he was a Japanese trained priest, born and trained in Japan, and came to America in the 50s to serve Japanese American community. But then in the 60s, a lot of hippies and beatniks were interested, Euro-American hippies and beatniks got interested in meditation and Zen and all that. And he started serving them as well. And that grew into San Francisco Zen Center, which now has an organic residential farm in Marin County and a monastery in Central California, where I spent 3 months a million years ago in 2019, as a training center. And so again, all these forms are meant to help us settle and deepen our moment-to-moment connection with not just this moment, but the true nature of all things, which is seen as really one thing. But in Zen, we like to have it both ways. It's like, it's many things and it's one thing at the same time, just like our hands, and it being whatever this is we're all experiencing together. I've been practicing this for 30 years. It started with very basic home practice of trying to sit once a day, most days of the week. And then I just was doing more and more retreats and kind of taking on more and more leadership role in our little group and helping to keep Josho Phelan coming to visit and giving talks. And that led in 1997 to this precept ceremony, which is a kind of formal taking of Buddhist vows. And it's basically a vow to try to serve all beings. And that includes oneself. That's an important part of all beings, is oneself. So whenever I'm talking about saving beings or serving beings, we have to include ourselves, or there's no way we can serve anybody. So the Soto Zen is, it's a Zen tradition which comes out of Mahayana Buddhist tradition, which developed kind of about 500 years after the Buddha lived, 2,500 years in northern India, Nepal region. And the Mahayana itself split into many different schools, and Zen was one of those, forming about 1,000 years ago, 1,000 plus, around 500, 600 in the Common Era. And so I'm happy to talk and answer questions about any of that after we'll talk. So what we're gonna do is, and I can answer more questions about me. One more thing about me, my day job, this is not a fully self-supporting thing. Almost as long as I've been practicing Zen, I've been a conservation biologist for the state of Virginia. Working for our Department of Conservation and Recreation, you know, everybody knows state parks. Few know natural heritage, which is what I work with. We're focused on the more than human realm, not just the parks and cabins, but we look for habitat and protect habitat for all the other critters. And then within that, a lot of my focus is invasive species. So 30 years of failure. If you saw the kudzu on your way over this morning, that's part of my failure. But also, if you're familiar with Zen literature, there's a lot of talk about weeds. I don't know how it all happened, but it all seemed to. It's very hard for me to discern my day job from the priest work I do anymore. It's all sort of blended or blurred, so anyway, I thought what we'd do is have a 20-minute silent sit. I'll ring the bell to begin and ring the bell to end. And is everyone familiar with some kind of meditation practice they can do? Otherwise, I can do a short guided meditation. But it's sometimes nice just to really plunge in silence, whatever it is, and meet that together. And then we'll do a short walking meditation. How many people are familiar with walking meditation? How many people are familiar with the Soto Zen walking meditation, which is very slow and painful? Because I say that because I'm a fast walker and I love walking fast. And I love hiking and huffing and puffing, and this is very
balance exercise.
It's a balance exercise. It's a patience exercise. Balance and patience and attention to not getting somewhere but arriving over and over. So we'll get a taste of that, and that'll be a nice break from sitting, and we'll walk a little bit, then we'll sit, and I'll chat at you some more, and then we'll talk together. All right, sound good? All right, and feel free to warn me of the times. I'll time the meditation and the walking, but after that I may not see the clock. Once I'm in talking mode, I can't read for some reason. All right. So I'll ring the bell, and I'll ring it kind of traditional. We start with 3 bells, and then we'll end with 2 bells, for reasons I won't go into. So nothing mystical, but just a form, pattern. And maybe find a path, we'll find a single file path around the room, around the chairs, on this side of the wires. And if you're home, you can just stand and walk in any space you have. And I'll describe the walk we do once we're kind of up and in a single file circle around the room. Kind of line up right behind me, and we'll go in, for some reason, everything in Soto Zen is clockwise. I think in Tibetan practice it's counterclockwise, but maybe it all balances out. So you can keep a nice space between yourself and the next person. And we have this hand posture, thumb inside of one fist, rest against your solar plexus. The other hand rests over top that fist. And that gives you kind of a nice collected, sort of dignified, noble feeling in your body, which in Zen, Soto Zen especially, we spend a lot of time on posture, and another time, if I'm invited back, we can talk more about that. But it helps to understand that there's, for us, Zen people and all people really, there's no difference between body and mind, no separation. And if we kind of assume a noble, dignified, collected posture in our body, that has a great potential for bringing our mind along into that same attitude, upright and at ease, noble, dignified, balanced, steady, peaceful, maybe, no matter what else is going on. So our walk is very slow, sort of half steps. And really one step per breath. You can kind of synchronize your stepping to your breathing, but we all breathe a little differently. So you sort of have to also calibrate to each other. So this is a practice of harmonizing body, breath, and mind, and inside and outside, each of us to all of us. Okay? So any questions? Good?
You could go out in the hall.
A little circle is good. Yeah. Again, that'll kind of create this collective feeling. Also, underscore, we're not going anywhere. Step after step, we're arriving. Huh? And I'll ring this once when we end, and just do a standing bow where you are, and then we'll walk back to our seats. but, it's good practice. And I'm not used to a chair with arms when I've got all this on too, but I should have thought about that, but, it's okay. It's all good, experience. So I think in my email with Susan, I said I would talk about dread and hope, which is probably something we've all been experiencing for at least 3, if not 8, or all of our life. 3 or 8 years or all of our life. And but to me, it's sort of really heightened over the summer with regards to climate and climate change and all that brings with it. And a little bit more of my background, I grew up in Northern Ohio in a town called Akron, Ohio. And if you know your environmental history, you'll know that Akron is in the same watershed as Cleveland, Ohio, and that they share the water, the watershed, the main stem of that watershed is the Cuyahoga River, which is infamous, if you're old enough to remember. It used to repeatedly catch on fire. The river, the river would catch on fire. And it wasn't the only place this was happening, but it was one dramatic place it was happening. And one of those fires in 1969 then got national coverage, and to make a long story short, triggered a lot of galvanization around environmental movement that was already kind of growing, thanks in great part to Rachel Carson, but just general awareness of many things going on in our society with greater rapidity of how we were changing the landscape, changing the forest, changing the rivers, everything becoming very apparent. And that actually led to the passage of the, unbelievably, now we say it in hindsight, under a Republican president, the Environmental Protection Act and the Clean Water Act and Clean Air Act. So young me, that's 12-year-old me now, and that stuff's passing. Maybe a deep imprint that led me to my environmental work through a kind of twisty, windy path. But it's something that I've been thinking about and working on for a long time. And climate, I started hearing about climate issues in 1988, 1989, something like that, which was around the same time I had moved to like Southeast US. And so the heat was like, whoa, people live this way. And then like, is it happening now? It took me a while to realize, no, this is the actual climate of this area. And but since that time, as we all know, these has been changing. And so I'm gonna mostly try to follow my written talk because I will improv too freely and too long and maybe miss some points I'd like to discuss with you. So last week, the meltdown in Washington, D.C. took place, maybe not coincidentally, during the hottest September in the hottest year in human history, in our record of temperature on this globe. And over this weekend, then the world experienced a tragic terrorist attack on the people of Israel, and really an attack on all people, really. And although Hamas, claims to act on behalf of Palestinians, many Palestinians are suffering and will suffer as a result of this attack. So round and round it goes, and this is the image Buddhists have been using for a long time. Buddhists and others of just these seem to be, we seem to create for ourselves one way or another. The Buddhists call this the wheel of life and death, the Bala Chakra. So wonderful. I think it's the first maybe infographic, or it's the first Buddhist infographic, is the wheel of life. If you've ever seen it, it's a nice teaching instrument. Maybe we could talk about that another time. Things are really heating up on every level. And so I want to come back to climate. Specifically, last week, the Washington Post reported that September's average temperature was nearly 1.7 degrees Fahrenheit above the 1991 to 2020 levels, or 3.1 to 3.2 degrees above normal from before industrialization, so 150 to 200 years back. And is due, to the widespread use of fossil fuels. We've been releasing all this carbon that plants and animals have been putting in the ground for millions of years, and now we're digging it up and having a bonfire. So the September data the article went on to say shows an acceleration in the warming, and some of this we know is driven by El Nino, but it's rung a lot of alarm bells this summer as the planet's temperature reached its warmest level in modern records, in probably 1,000 years. And one climate scientist said that the September warming, he quote said it was absolutely gobsmackingly bananas. So, you know, and I've been thinking about this for a long time. I nevertheless felt a kind of pit in my stomach over this past summer, you know, with the fires in Canada wafting down, and the smoke, and we literally could almost taste the fires here that were hundreds of miles away. So the point I want to get to is successfully addressing the climate crisis, and I think all of you probably already know this. So somebody once said, yeah, you're just singing to the choir. It wasn't to me, it was a quote I heard. Yeah, but the choir's got to sing. So it might be all choir singing today, but we have to sing. You know, successfully addressing climate crisis requires that each of us take on a climate active attitude, which means being informed, getting involved, taking action. Recycling solar panels, EVs, and, you know, signing online petitions, my friends, are good and necessary, but they are not enough. So it's really got to go deeper, and it will take a concerted political movement to make the changes we need to make. There's got to be laws and regulations and de-emphasizing one kind of economy that has benefited from our many subsidies for a long time, and emphasizing another kind of economy. So someone asked Bill McKibben. Does anyone know who Bill McKibben is? A few people. So Bill McKibben's an environmental journalist, writing for many years on climate. 1980, late 80s, he wrote a book called The End of Nature, which is the first kind of popular work on climate change and what it would mean. And if you can believe it, and I'm sorry for the younger folks in the room, that yes, we've been thinking about this long, and here we are. But somebody recently asked McKibben, what can I do as an individual about the climate? And he said, and I love this because it's very dharmic, stop being an individual. So some of you, if you've studied, you know, a good bit of Buddhist understanding of the self is made up of not self elements, right? Anyone read Thich Nhat Hanh? That's kind of his phrasing, and I think it's very beautiful and to the point. So what that means is, well, I'll say more about that, but so stop being an individual. I mean, it means also we have to act from this understanding of interdependence, both ecologically and socially. And climate chaos and climate anxiety are here to stay, and we'll all have to learn wise responses to these conditions. But seeing ourselves as a part of the earth and part of community are deep ways to take care of ourselves, our community, and the earth. An old engaged Buddhist slogan says, worry is not preparation. So if you feel yourself worried and stressed out, you might think, well, what could I be doing? And each of us, you know, we can connect, communicate, act, but each of us, of course, will find our own unique ways to make change happen in the direction we need it to happen. And I would like to propose to you that Zazen, or meditation itself, is a radical act that touches the deep source of our situation in incalculable ways. Practicing beginner's mind, or not knowing, or opening the hand of thought. Are you familiar with any of these phrases, like beginner's mind? I'll say a little bit more about it going on. Really gets to the core of our identity crisis. And that's what the planet is suffering. That is what we are suffering, an identity crisis. And I don't just mean like, you know, Celtic Americans versus Italian Americans versus African Americans versus, you know, LGBTQ, all those identity groups, but basic human identity. We're troubled much deeper than those other kinds of identity. And this, it comes from a widespread and ancient delusion about our true nature. That being that the delusion is that we see ourselves as separate from each other, and even separate in a more extreme form, separate from cause and effect. And so the climate crisis means, as we are learning, that we face much uncertainty. So years ago, somebody was talking to me about climate change or global warming, and I said, I don't really use those phrases anymore. I talk about climate chaos. Because every place on earth is going to experience it differently, at different rates, in different ways. So on the surface, or just if you're scanning headlines, it's like, it takes some slow thinking to appreciate how small temperature changes globally manifest in all these dramatic ways all over the earth. And that's I think what's been so hard about this, it's a lot like appreciating the fact that the earth is round and not at the center of the universe. You have to be very still and take very careful measurements to really appreciate that. But ancients did. We know the ancients did understand. This is later when we got more urbanized and kind of took a lot of things for granted, and lived more in a built environment. We started thinking, it's really all just flat, whatever. But anyway, so in a sense, this morning, we face uncertainty in Zazen, and Buddhist meditation actually is a practice that prepares us for meeting uncertainty. Like every time we sit down, and if you've practiced for more than a few weeks, you probably know that every sit is different, right? It feels different, different things come up, different feeling maybe afterwards. But the more you continue that practice, the more you kind of develop a kind of steady, continuous feeling around that practice, even though each sit is still going to be different. So in a sense, this morning, we've already done some climate work. So thank you very much. And don't stop there. In a bit of good news, I know I've been kind of heavy here, coming out of the blocks, but this past week I recently learned Uruguay, South American country, is now 98% renewable energy. 98%. A country of 3 million people, small but great start. Great achievement, especially so many, south of the equator countries face all kinds of debt issues and competitive issues and blah, 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 blah. They just cut through all that 30 years ago. They assigned some physicist who had no previous government experience to lead this effort. And it's like, I don't know how to do it. But now they've achieved this landmark position where 98% of their energy resources are renewable. It's amazing. So, if they can muster, the will, skill, and investment, so could the richest country on earth, I think. And there are many such stories, and I could go on with that all morning, but I'm not going to. You should seek out these stories and be inspired and help repeat them. Quickly, I'll just say 2 wonderful sources of good news. Literally, the Good News Network. Does anyone know that web source? A great set of stories that are not the headlines of this and that disaster, and I will be talking about disaster in a minute. And then reasons to be cheerful. Also emphasizing kind of what they call solutions journalism, and not just seeing a problem, but what are the solutions that are out there and that people are putting into practice around these problems.
Also a nice network, I get that page.
What is it?
It's called Nice.
Nice, okay, easy, yeah, all these are easy to remember. They're called basically what you would think they would and should be called. And versus our mainstream media, which, bless their hearts, they just get caught in a groove that is not entirely helpful. So let's talk about disaster, since we're already there. Along with these increased temperatures this year, and many of us experiencing these far-reaching effects of the catastrophic wildfires, as I already mentioned, and the Maui fires in Hawaii, that touched a little closer to home than I than maybe normal, because one of my yoga teachers lives out there. I didn't know where she was. It turns out she was on Maui that day and was fine. She got off safely, but it was hard to get back to just to the next island over after that fire. Also, that fire had a lot to do with invasive species, so another failure on my part to get that addressed. But I will say there is a great rising tide of awareness of invasive species and native plants, and these two things go hand in hand. And I was just remembering this morning, yeah, I was like, I don't know, like 16 or 17 going, oh, I gotta mow the lawn again. Why don't we just let it grow up? This is like 1977, or he's like waiting for the native plant revolution. So all this disaster, as someone who's maybe a little too deeply familiar with apocalyptic science fiction stories, which is one of my, vices maybe, my dread can call on some very vivid images of things going badly. Thankfully, though, these are just fantasies. And in her study of the historical records of human response to disaster, a book called Paradise Built in Hell. Anyone familiar with this book? Everyone should put it at the top of their list right now. Paradise Built in Hell. Rebecca Solnit is the author, brilliant social historian, poet, and actually a Dharma cousin of mine. She practices Zen Buddhism, and she's a brilliant writer anyway. And her writing never exactly, she never like calls up like Dharmic words we might recognize, but it's all there, interdependence and change. And anyway, Paradise Built in Hell, she looks at 100 years of history, beginning with the 1906 earthquake in San Francisco to the 2005 Katrina hurricane in Louisiana, New Orleans. And she cites an overwhelming body of evidence that humans are by nature cooperative and compassionate. Lo and behold, despite what, some of the shows we see, some of them news reporting, that it's much worse than that. So the recent pandemic also, I think, has maybe given us many of our own experience and examples of this, right? In our little group, just like right out of the box, people were sewing masks and distributing them, and that kind of thing on many scales happens in a disaster. And another interesting thing I thought in the disaster response, in addition to compassion and caring and cooperation, which again, these are what dominate these huge disasters, not the kind of Mad Max reality that we see in film, how people turned to nature, and nature even in their backyard, in their gardens. Huge, been a huge surge. Maybe some of you have done the same, right? Our state parks and natural heritage, our state natural area preserves had this overwhelming flood of visitation during that time. And I'm still feeling the professional effects of that, because we have so much more interest and support for what we're doing than we did even 4 years ago. So that is very heartening. Good news amidst all this, and it took a disaster to kind of shake people's out of their sleepwalking a bit. So here's a quote from Rebecca's book. The study of disasters makes it clear that there are plural and contingent natures, but the prevalent human nature in disaster is resilient, resourceful, generous, empathic, and brave. The language of therapy, she says, speaks almost exclusively of the consequence of disaster as trauma, suggesting a humanity that is unbearably fragile, a self that does not act but is acted upon, the most basic recipe of the victim. Disaster movies and the media continue to portray ordinary people as hysterical or vicious in the face of calamity. We believe these sources telling us we are victims or brutes more than we trust our own experience. Most people know this other human nature from experience, though almost nothing official or mainstream confirms it. So, but I think once you tune into that, you begin seeing it, and if you begin tuning into nice or good news networks versus, times or whatever. It's happening all the time. It's all the time. It just doesn't make good TV, whatever that goes, whoever is defining that, I don't know. So I find all this very encouraging and hopeful, and I think it reinforces a lot of our basic Buddhist practices. Our three treasures in Buddhism are Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and that means awakening, reality, and community. That's what the three treasures can be understood as: awakening, reality as it is, and community. So we could keep those things together, and we'll be okay. It won't be picture perfect always, but we'll be okay. So change and uncertainty, are not new conditions to human life either. And the Buddha, 2,500 years ago, mapped a lot of this out, and it's the same. It's not any different. And he maybe was even talking in some ways, maybe more extreme than we do. So it's necessary for us to embrace this climate condition and the anxiety and dread it may cause. And the Buddha, this is the Buddha's teaching, and we have now research that confirms doing so, turning towards our dread and anxiety, can release energy and joy into pro-social actions. So not just putting it off or thinking about it in between traffic stops, but taking direct, thoughtful action, but really feeling what we're feeling about all this. Is an important part of our healing and our action. So although I'm talking about climate crisis here, we've been very still for 10 minutes. A nice measure of our stillness. Where is it?
Actually, I was gonna say those.
Maybe we just need to see the rain for a minute.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's raining where any of you are, maybe not in Nepal, but it is here.
If you were gonna stand up and wave your arm.
Wave your arm. I'm sure that's together we bring the light. Yes, right. Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, all together. All right, perfect. Thank you for arranging that. So 2,500 years ago, the Buddha taught that we are faced with three inescapable characteristics. Does anyone know the three characteristics? I know in Buddhism there are many lists. And they start with lists of one, then they go into lists of two things, and then three, and then four, like the Four Noble Truths, 5 elements of self, the 6 perfections, the 8-fold path, the 12 links of causation. It goes on and on. There's like even a whole sutra it's called the Sutra of Numbers, and it's just each teaching based on the list, starting with lists of 1 to list of 2. Anyway, there's 3 of this, 3 of that. So 3 characteristics. Anyway, these are pretty fundamental to all Buddhist teaching then. One is anicca, or impermanence. Right? We already know this. The ceaseless flow of existence. That's anicca, impermanence. So climate change, and people try to brush off climate change, like there's always change. Yeah, the rate of change is what makes a difference now. But anyway, change is always happening. Anatman, which is non-self, which is another way of saying boundless self, a self that is dependent on not self elements. I think we all kind of know how this works. One fundamental way is like, you're feeling fine, you feel very composed, you know who you are, then you catch a whiff of something and you realize suddenly, I'm hungry. And you weren't aware of this a few minutes ago. Or you're feeling one way, I'm very self-composed and everything, and then you get a call from it's time to have a family gathering, and you're maybe you're like, maybe you're sad before, now you're happy, or maybe you're happy before, now you're sad. This is how this interdependence is constantly working on us. Causes and conditions is another way of talking about it. And then the third, so impermanence, non-self or interdependence, and the third is suffering, which the flip side of suffering for Mahayana Buddhists especially is nirvana. So another interdependent reality, but suffering, which is kind of goes with human condition. We're not going to always get the things we want. We're not at the center of the universe, despite some claims. And Yeah, we're gonna age out, get sick, old, and die. That kind of sucks. That's dukkha, that's suffering. But the flip side, when you embrace this and embrace your boundlessness, then it's nirvana. And quickly I'll say here, nirvana, the root of that word means to extinguish or put out like a flame. And I'll be talking about fire here in a second, so keep that in mind. But one of my Zen teachers says that it means chill out. So keep that in mind too. If you just chill out in a hot situation, you're probably going to bring some nirvanic peace into that moment. So what's new for us in the 21st century, as I said, kind of hinted at, is the rate of change. The rate of change we're inflicting on the climate, the rate of change we're inflicting on forests, fields, marshes, species, populations of species, that are just very hard for these natural systems to respond to in a way that will continue sustaining our very habitable Earth, very habitable. And it's extremely habitable. And in fact, we know it's the only habitable planet we know about right now, right? And it's been very, very kind to us over the past 10,000 years. And we've survived, various ice ages and the like, but maybe nothing quite like what's coming. So in just a few decades, we've burned up and released all these ancient carbons, as I mentioned, and moving a whole lot of stuff around the globe very rapidly. And that's part of the invasive species problem, just moving stuff around from where it evolved, where it may have evolved, and seeing kind of checks and balances in the natural systems to places where kudzu here has no natural enemies. And we don't like to turn it into dessert the way they do in Japan and China. So it's just growing out there like free food on the trees, but nobody's touching it. We don't recognize it, and neither do the birds and plants, birds and insects here recognize it as a potential food source for myriad reasons. So the Buddha saw that the degree to which we fail to understand and accept these three conditions, we suffer, and we cause suffering for others. And not accepting these things is what the Buddha would call ignorance or delusion. So the great sin in Buddhism is this, ignorance or delusion. But it's also something we accept and understand as part of our own experience, which is a window or a door or really a large gate to compassion for others too. And we begin to sense our own delusions and a degree to which we may cling to a fixed idealistic sense of ourself or another person. And then we realize, oh, we can loosen up on that. And maybe everyone else can loosen up too, so we can have compassion for each other. So these three conditions, change, interdependence, suffering, are really like, in the Buddhist sense, like gravity. And we've all learned to live with gravity, right? It's a challenging thing. I mean, if you look around, there are not many species that walk around like we do. They crawl, they use all fours or sixes or hundreds of legs to stand and move, or they choose not to do that at all. They just stay in the ocean. Like, this is good. And so on and so forth. Or trees, they spend a lot of their effort just to be upright, but in one place. But we're moving all around, just start walking. I mean, how many of you kind of felt the walking this morning, like became aware of kind of the moment to moment subtle balancing effort you make? We didn't make, and we do that totally taking it for granted now. And I realized recently, I chose not to have kids, but I realize now, probably a good thing, because I would have like avidly filmed my child like learning to walk to show them later all the times they fell and cried and scraped themselves, but just to remind them though, this is what learning looks like, and you did it and you survived, and there'll be many other things like this. Don't give up. But we forget all that. I have no memory of falling learning to walk. Does anyone? Yeah, maybe relearning to walk after an accident or something, but anyway, we forget that. But we've learned about gravity. We understand it, but some people get a little forgetful. If you think you are separate or untouched by gravity, you're going to die eventually, taking some risk, or maybe we will put you somewhere for safekeeping, that you wake up to gravity. So the Buddha had a teaching called the Adita Parayaya Sutta, or the teaching on the Fire Sutra. And he literally stated things in this very alarming way. The all is a flame. Which all is a flame? And this is an old Indian text, and Indians had an amazing ability for precision and discernment and dividing and further dividing reality into finer and finer resolution. So which all? I mean, you say all, it seems like that should be obvious. All. Which all? So he goes on now and describes in kind of detail the eye. The eye is a flame, forms are a flame, our consciousness is a flame, our perceptions are a flame. All that arises is a flame, experienced as pleasure, as pain, or neither pleasure and pain, that too is on fire. A flame with what? A flame with the fire of passion, the fire of aversion, the fire of delusion. Another list of three. These are the three poisons of passion or greed, aversion or hatred, and delusion or ignorance. A flame, I tell you, with birth, aging and death, with sorrows. Really, he's talking about change. So to the degree we are in denial about change, and yet everything is changing, everything seems to be burning. Until we appreciate, well, everything is burning. I've been burning, and I only exist because everything is changing. This next breath is like change, that if we didn't get that next breath, we would feel alarm, right? Rightly so. So bodhisattvas, in the face of all this, he said, sorry, as I already mentioned, to put out the fires of greed, hate, delusion is nirvana, is to extinguish or cool off, chill out these flames. So bodhisattvas, does everyone know what a bodhisattva is? A bodhisattva, a being who kind of defers on their entry into nirvana or final nirvana for the benefit of all beings. They will live and work with all suffering beings to help guide them towards out of delusion, into awakening, into Buddha Dharma Sangha together and awaken together. So bodhisattvas vow to end the suffering of beings, and they defer all this, as I said, the release of nirvana until we all practice this together. So in a sense, bodhisattvas practice altruism. This is a favorite refrain of the Dalai Lama. Let's talk about altruism. And in a book we're reading in Richmond Zen, and I highly recommend, so along with Paradise Built in Hell, I highly recommend Standing at the Edge by Joan Halifax. And in there, she talks about these various edge states like altruism, empathy, integrity, respect, and another list, engagement. But also talks about how these things kind of have a shadow side that if we're not aware of, we can make things worse rather than thinking we're making the better. Even though we think we're doing the good thing, we might have slipped into a kind of alternate version that is not as wholesome as the true expression of, say, altruism. Anyway, she offers this wonderful poem that is for me, and be clear why when I read it, expression of this kind of bodhisattva reflex, bodhisattva action, or acting for the benefit of others amidst the kind of, or maybe against the flow of your own busyness. This is a poem by Joseph Bruchac. He's a American Indian poet and writer, activist. The old man must have stopped our car 24 times to climb out and gather into his hands the small toads, blinded by our light, leaping live drops of rain. The rain was falling, a mist about his white hair, and I kept saying, "You can't save them all. Accept it, get back in. We've got places to go." But leathery hands full of wet brown life, knee deep in the summer roadside grass, he just smiled and said, "They have places to go too." Love that poem. So Great, I think I will actually end on time. So amidst all this disaster, amidst all the wet toads on the road and cars driving at 80 miles an hour. I just take a step back and kind of offer these practices that are well described in this book, Standing at the Edge, and other places, and you may have encountered them before, but in the 1990s, American Zen teacher Bernie Glassman and his wife and fellow Zen priest Sandra Jishu Holmes founded the Zen Peacemaker Order. And this is their goal was to bridge Zendo practice, our calm, quiet, settled, peaceful, focused, concentrated, nirvanic, dharmic, yum time together in quiet, bridge that with the suffering of the wide and wild world, right? And they articulated the essence of the practice for them to do this in what they call the 3 tenets. And these are practices developed and tested in a variety of settings, including street retreats, where they were doing Zen retreats on the streets of New York City, living as homeless people and living with and serving homeless people, but then gathering somewhere in a park somewhere to do Zen meditation practice. And they go off and try to survive, do some panhandling, experience what that is, and then go to the kitchens and work in the kitchens. And then other things like similar retreats at Auschwitz and Dachau, and a whole variety of other kind of wild settings. Not your typical quiet Zendo space. So the 3 tenets are not knowing, bearing witness, and compassionate action. So these are very accessible terms, but then within Buddhism and Zen, they kind of take on more specific meanings, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So not knowing, Halifax describes as the practice of letting go of fixed ideas about ourselves and the universe. That's very basic, right? It's basic to almost any meditation app. I'll tell you that, right? Sit, let go. At some point I want to write a long talk about letting go and our evolutionary history as primates and what that might mean. Because once upon a time, holding on meant life and death, right? But to move through, you have to let go too. So some combination of grasping and releasing. Anyway, letting go to fix ideas about ourselves is not knowing. And we have some synonyms for this, not knowing too. Beginner's mind. So you probably heard of the book Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And so that was written by Suzuki Roshi, who I mentioned, founding the San Francisco Zen Center. And he wrote, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. And anyone who's made it through college probably knows, or maybe even high school knows that, yes, you start with this, it could be anything. By the end, you're like, there's fewer and fewer choices or options until you remember that beginner's mind. But Suzuki goes on, that's the kind of most quoted thing about beginner's mind. Beginner's mind, endless possibilities, experts few. But he goes on to say a little more. I think it's important to know. In the beginner's mind, there is no thought. I have attained something. All self-centered thoughts limit our vast mind. So anytime we enter I, that is beginning to limit our view of things. When we have no thought of achievement, no thought of self, we are true beginners. Then we can really learn something. The beginner's mind is the mind of compassion. And I think that's a really not an intuitive connection there. But he says, when our mind is compassionate, it is boundless, like the beginner's mind. So Dogen Zenji, who founded the Soto Zen sect in Japan, he learned it in China and he brought it to Japan in the 13th century. Always emphasized how important it is to resume our boundless original mind, our beginner's mind. Then we are always true to ourselves, in sympathy with all beings, and can actually practice. So there's another aspect to this beginner's mind I want to bring up from old. So maybe some of you know about Zen and its kind of unique literary teaching tool called koans. These are often pretty enigmatic sounding on first glance. but they're not really. I think it's a matter of poor translation and poor understanding of the context of use and the literary history of which they came from. But they still do have a sense of like knocking us out of our assumptions. That's a kind of major point. So there was an old story. One teacher asked another, "Where are you going?" It looked like he's going somewhere. And today, like we're always going somewhere. This other priest said, "Around on pilgrimage." The first one said, "Well, what is the purpose of pilgrimage?" And the second priest said, "I don't know." And the second teacher said, "Not knowing is most intimate." And this introduced to me a sense of beginner's mind as not just like possibilities are endless, but it's very intimate. Because it's like when you walk into a room, you have no expectation of who you're going to meet. Your senses come alive, and it's balance, right? And I see you all just as I see you now, without much preconception. Not that I'm free of that stuff, but so that's a beginner's mind is most intimate. And whenever we drop or let go or open the hand of thought, we enter into this kind of intimate state where our unity is, even as we're different, we can feel our unity. And though we're distinct, like the five fingers, we have this undeniable unity. Right? So not knowing then is to suspend one's personal views, acquired conceptual knowledge and information sourced in hearsay, or nowadays we call that social media. And to accept that we all have these prejudices and biases, and accept that they are limited, and then to allow one's senses and mind to receive fresh, vivid, new, living experience information. So it's not exactly that we'll ever be completely free of our biases, of our past experience, but once we appreciate how much they're shaping our experience right now, and our view is always limited, then we have some intimacy at the moment, and it can be open a little more to what's going on right now. I want to wrap up in a couple minutes. So I'm going to kind of quickly go through these other ones because I really would love to just talk with you all. So that's not knowing, and that's a real key element of Zen practice, and many of you already probably know that. And another quote of Dogen before we move on to the other two tenets. He said, and this gets back to the non-self, which sounds very academic and dry, but Dogen puts it a little different way. To carry yourself forward and experience myriad things is delusion. That myriad things come forth and experience themselves is awakening. So to carry yourself forward, like, I know where I'm going. And I know what you all are really like, or whatever. And I know everything here, and I'm telling you this story. But to allow things to come forward, to just open our senses to things as it is, as Suzuki used to say, things as it is. A funny way of saying it, but maybe it was his English, maybe not. Things as it is come forward and reveal themselves to us if we're listening. And again, I think Zazen and meditation is a lot about listening. So the second tenet is bearing witness. And these are very related, and we say that all the time in Buddhism. Everything's interrelated, connected, interdependent, overlapping. Bearing witness is the practice of just being present for the suffering and the joy of the world. So bearing witness. It's kind of, I think they borrowed this term from the Quakers, but it's very much at the heart of a lot of our basic sitting practice experience, right? To just sit and be with your thoughts, feelings, sensations as they are, that is bearing witness to your lived experience in this moment, right? And as we practice that on our cushions, in our chairs, in our meditation halls, and carry that out into the world, then it becomes more like bearing witness and the ability to just be with somebody, whatever they're experiencing, expressing, and hopefully together find a way forward. So yeah, it's that bearing witness, that's meditation, but just listening, just sitting, these are just bearing witness. Compassionate action is the third tenet then, and action, this compassionate action is meant to arise out of this not knowing and bearing witness kind of quality or attitude that we cultivate in our practice, and which fosters healing of ourselves and the world. Right? When we're moving from a place of like we rather than me versus you, that's healing, right? Healing, as you probably know, comes from the same root as the word whole. Right? So healing, wholeness, wholeheartedness. So I'm going to jump down a little bit. So we practice. We try to practice these tenets, however we might frame them. There's many ways to frame them. And although, this busy world, may frown on, especially a practice of stopping, sitting quietly. And in Soto Zen, we even face the wall to make it even worse, or more radical. Face the wall. I mean, how unuseful is that? Were you bad? Yeah. So, the world may not appreciate stillness and silence as a response to the myriad disasters we're facing. And there's a song, I don't know how many of you remember this, it's now rather old, but what's so funny about peace, love, and understanding? I still feel like we're still living under this attitude that there's something funny about peace, love, and understanding, and it's hard to just talk about. And as well as, I would extend that to silence, stillness, and intimacy. But this is exactly what this practice, what all, I think, Buddhist practice aims at. But we might ask, will it make a difference? And maybe like Zhou Yang on pilgrimage, the answer could be, I don't know. And that is most intimate. Zen teachers advise against clinging to what is sometimes called gaining mind. So we're often encouraged to do these practices, do these things. Yes, we're aimed at enlightenment, awakening all beings, blah, blah, blah. These are lofty goals, but you know what? Don't have a gaining idea about that. Don't cling to any view about how it's going to look. Just practice. Dogen again said, realization, which is his word for awakening, is effort without desire. Wait, but I had these goals and I was going to have these accomplishments and I was going to get these stages and I was going to get there and then I would have all things and then I would be happy. That's kind of our everyday kind of consciousness. But and for him, I would say desire is a kind of a self-centered, grasping kind of desire, a kind of unbalanced or a neurotic or unreflective desire, just kind of a cumulative kind of desire. And one that puts kind of my gain over yours. But to put it in a little different words, a wonderful quote that actually I turned out to by Rebecca Solnit from the Czech playwright, activist, and leader Václav Havel. He was president of Czechoslovakia after they freed themselves from the Russians about 1 million years ago. And he said this about hope. So Buddhism, we don't talk really a lot about hope so much. Because again, just practice, everything will take care of itself. a little naive, and there's probably other words for hope. But anyway, hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense, regardless of how it turns out. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm. Yeah. So I'll read it one more time. Hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense, regardless of how it turns out. So I've been failing in conservation biology for 30 years and probably Zen as well, but it just makes sense to me to be doing these things. So please continue your wholehearted effort. Again, I really appreciate the invitation to come spend some time with you. a beautiful rainy Saturday morning. It was nice to drive on the highway when no one else was really, or very few people were out. And yeah. So any questions, comments, responses, complaints?
Well, Bodhisattva is selfless and altruistic. Is the soul that goes to nirvana selfish?
Yeah, I think you could have that idea. And I think it from this side, it's very hard to say. But I think a lot of the Mahayana Buddhism and the Bodhisattva ideal arose as a critique of people seeking nirvana in a selfish way, rather than seeking nirvana in a practicing without desire kind of way. And very easy mistake to make. And again, it's like another one of these kind of positive goals or attitudes that kind of twist or bend in a negative way. That would be my response to that.
Will the Bodhisattvas know they are such?
Good question. Dogen says there are Buddhas who do not necessarily know they are Buddhas, but they go on awakening other Buddhas. And it's probably from kind of modern psychology, and Joan Halifax talks about this in this book, about it's probably kind of the purest form of altruism or bodhisattva ideal is that you don't know that you're doing any good, and just doing it because it's the right thing. It's another kind of funny Zen story. One Dharma figure asks their Dharma sibling, you know the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Guanyin, Kanon, the Bodhisattva of compassion, and he, she, they, and you can really use all those pronouns for Guanyin, Avalokiteshvara, is often depicted in Tibetan art was having 1,000 hands, and each of these hands has the eye in the palm of the hand. And so this one monk asked another, how do they control all those hands? There's a lot of hands. How do they manage doing anything with all those hands? They're doing all this good that they're doing, saving beings. How do they manage that situation? And the other brother said, it's like reaching back in the middle of the night for a pillow that has maybe moved, right? And you're just in the middle of the night, you're half asleep, half awake, and you just reach and move that pillow to where it needs to be, and then let it go. There's no consciousness that I am doing something good. There's just sort of this call and response. Some suffering, something out of place, something's aligned, and then we go back to sleep. The story goes on, but that's probably it makes the point.
So it relates to, I was gonna ask you, what is the shadow side of altruism? It sort of sounds like it's practicing it with ego.
Yeah.
I mean, with being like, so great because I'm doing this.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's the shadow side.
Yeah. Yeah. And then Halifax in the book goes in a lot of description of a kind of modern psychological study that has identified what they call pathological altruism. And it's then when the people acting on behalf of others are maybe not listening, not knowing, not coming from compassion, but like, how much good can I do? Because my 501c3 is funded to do this good stuff, and we're coming in, we're going to tell you what you need, blah, blah, blah. Or me, you can say, oh, my dear wife, no, that's not how you should teach a class. It should look like this. And she has 30 years experience of teaching middle school, and I have 0. So what am I doing? Why am I even moving my lips? But yeah, the ego comes in and starts, you think you're helping, and they go into this, and she goes into this in the book about kind of what someone practicing altruism is the attitude, a wholesome attitude would be of serving, service, versus helping and fixing. Which anyone in long relationships knows what that looks like. Like I just described, oh, here, honey, let me help you with that lesson plan. Here's what you should do. And I'm not.
It might be worth noting that Joan covered these things for experience.
Oh, absolutely.
And so before we judge people that are doing these things the
Yeah.
way that we think is wrong,
Right,
she did it wrong a lot
yeah,
Oh, okay.
and found this.
yeah, I mean, some could accuse like Zen Peacemaker Order and a lot of groups like of a kind of ambulance mentality, and they're coming in to save the day, and she does have a long on the ground experience and a variety of helping, what became for her, the verb for her is serving. And that means you're listening, you're asking what are the needs of the people you think you are serving, and making sure this is a balance and an equal relationship, and not like, I'm from the government, I'm here to help. Yeah, thank you, and a lot, and this book is really rich with a lot of that direct experience. So,
We had a group that read that a couple of years ago.
oh yeah, great, read it again. I've been rereading it for like 5 years now. Yeah, anyone else, comment, question?
Do you wanna Zoom? And
Oh, anyone out in Zoom land? Do I see a hand? Okay, is that Julie?
Yes, it is. You mentioned a poem a while back from Native American, I believe, an Indian.
Yes.
It starts with
Joseph.
to move through, what was it, Joseph?
Bruchac.
What is the name of the poem? I want to find that poem. Yeah.
I can't remember the name of it, but Bruchac is Bruchac.
Okay, and it begins, how does it begin? I can find it.
Yeah, if you look up Joseph Bruchac and toads, that will narrow your search tremendously. Susan.
I have a question, no one else has. This is a really strange question. Okay, I did not know your background with the biology and the conservation. You said something in the beginning about weeds and like your crossing over your different activities. I'm just curious, what are some, can you think of any, like, I love like plant metaphors. Can you think of any like Buddhism, like weeds? Like I didn't get that. I just be curious. I love plants.
Okay, how much time do we have?
We have.
Maybe I can teeter tray as a future talk and we could talk about, but Buddhism is shot through with plant metaphor. The Buddha came out of an agricultural culture. It starts with like his earliest memory of having a kind of compassionate thought was while watching workers in an agricultural field plowing the rows of soil to plant the seed, and the plows were cutting through crickets and worms, and he had this spontaneous like, oh, these people are working and these beings are dying for my benefit. And it just led to a spontaneous sense of compassion and a response of like, to just sit upright and at ease in a meditative posture when he was, a toddler. So the story goes, but I think it's a beautiful image. But then also in those days, it was agricultural culture, but it doesn't look like American Midwest. Right, it's a pretty wild landscape. There are tigers, elephants, rhinoceroses running around in that same landscape. So it's a lot of appreciation of the wild world in Buddhist teaching, but especially a lot of plant metaphor. And just the whole idea of like cultivating the path, is coming from agricultural sense of cultivating. And there's a whole thing called what I call seed theory. It's basically around karma, and you're either planting good seeds or negative seeds, and how you tend those seeds and those plants is going to be what shapes your experience. And then in Zen, there's all kinds of things like, I built a grass roof hut where there was nothing of value. After eating, I relaxed, enjoyed a nap. Once it was completed, fresh weeds appeared. Now it has been lived in, covered by weeds. And that's somewhat in a reaction to kind of the Buddhist kind of convention of weeds, like weeds are like these negative things you have to remove. But Mahayana and Zen kind of develop a more friendly or holistic attitude towards weeds and our negative habit patterns throughout the Mahayana and Vajrayana. It's like we can't just throw these negative things away. We want to turn them into the soil. If we can't throw them away, or as my teacher says, there's nowhere to spit. That isn't you in some sense. So we can't just turn our backs on these things. And same with weeds. So even though I'm this invasive species biologist, I know that they're here to stay. And it's how we take care of them is how we take care of ourselves and the planet. So I'm not often advocating like napalming all the kudzu in the state. I don't do that, and I try to steer people away from war metaphors to gardening metaphors, because people love like, let's have an invasive species attack day, let's get our army together, and we'll get out there and we'll fight. That is just like so unsustainable and boring. Not to mention boring. But cultivating, that's interesting. You learn a lot about yourself and other beings cultivating. So
Is there any way we can get a transcript of today's talk? I would like to reread it at some point.
we recorded it.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
And everybody's okay with us posting it on YouTube? Okay.
Uh-oh. Ben.
I was wondering, I really want to say thank you for this. The terror response from climate chaos reporting is something I live with weekly. And such that it tends to cause unconscious shutting down response, and which is not what I intend. And do you have you said it really well over the last few minutes. If you were going to sort of summarize a 2 or 3 sentence, I don't know if the right word is advice.
The mantra for dispelling climate anxiety.
Yes, I think. For dispelling climate terror.
Yeah. Well, I'm not very good at boiling it down. But one thing, one of my teachers, my teacher's teacher said to me once, I was confused a lot about what to do and how to go forward in practice. He said, just keep practicing. Just keep sitting. And what he means by that is really zazen, like just sitting. Like, don't worry about, are you a priest? Are you becoming a priest? Are you going to be a good priest? Are you going to be a bad priest? Are you going to, do any of this? Just keep sitting. Just keep practicing. So that's one. And then the other part is take care of yourself. Yeah. Go out and enjoy the wild world everywhere you can. And the more you start looking for that, if I looked around a few minutes, I would find it in here. There'll be a spider, an insect or something, the wild world creeping its way into everything. And then looking out there, clearly we don't have to go far to experience the kind of what some eco-philosophers and eco-psychologists are calling the more than human realm, to kind of get out of our anthropocentric sense of the earth spinning around us, but realizing it's a complicated, wild system that we live in and dependent on. But be acquainted with that. Go out, enjoy it. Our senses are actually, I keep finding it, I think getting older, maybe many other folks have experienced this. Boy, science just keeps confirming that things I like are good for us. Meditation, yoga, nature, doing compassionate action makes you feel better. Oh, okay, well, whatever, I'll go back to my non-gaming mind and just do those things. Just do them.
I just have my problem with that. I know, I understand how it alleviates anxiety, it can calm one down, but if that's all that we do, where's the action out in the world
Yeah.
to make sure that the right person is elected to office that will actually promote our conservation goals and not the wrong person, because there are a lot of people that are ignorant and don't know what the.
Totally agree with you. I felt that same thing, but it was my year of working with Greenpeace in Washington, DC in the Reagan era that I realized people burn out very fast doing the right thing day in and day out.
Yeah.
And that was what really tipped me towards looking deeper into Buddhism, especially to find ways to take care of myself. And that it unfolded in many ways over 30 years. And But the other part is what steers us towards action is each other. And also, I think truly going out and loving a place, loving the beings you find there, that love, then you realize I need to do something for that mushroom that can't call my senator. I will call my senator. Right? And you have to kind of keep going back and forth. It's just pure enjoyment and getting out, but that will cultivate this sense of the wider world that needs our specific action. Yeah.
One thing, and Ben might be able to speak to this more, that Sangha has in embryonic stage a plan to create a committee of compassionate action. Ben's on the, are you working on developing this? Doing that not here.
John Chowning, the Sangha president, is thinking about the origins of the committee. So I don't think any names have come in yet.
So if you're interested, this is something that's coming. I mean, they've already voted to do this. It's just what form it takes.
Cool.
So if you want to get in on how that works.
Related to that, in our group, we're looking at, I have Dharma cousins that out west do what they call election retreats. And they also have groups that get together just to encourage each other to make the calls, you know, the kinds of calls that like calling out into other states or other districts to encourage fence-sitting voters towards voting. And I'm not telling them exactly how to vote, but hey, vote. And things like that. But they structure it around periods of meditation and periods of letter writing, call making, or even the door-to-door stuff. So I can share that with Susan and Ben, like kind of the model we're looking at. We haven't done it yet in Richmond, but we've been talking about doing that because this for next Virginia election, very important, and the next national election, yeah, you know, very critical. So that's one thing you might look at, and there's other many ways. I mean, I even think just going out and plant some trees together, that's a joyous activity. And again, roots you to a place, and planting a tree is an act of hope also. But before I talk more about that, I just want to check in again with our friends on Zoom. Any questions, comments? If we maybe missed your hands, I'm sorry. Okay. Great. Well, thank you for joining us. Anyone else here?
Quickly, the difference between a monk and a priest in Buddhism.
Okay. Priests can be married. That's the short answer. In Zen Buddhism, and probably generally Buddhism in East Asia, priests will marry. Monks and nuns are celibate and monastic dwellers generally. Priests may be in monasteries, but may also have an outside life or might have a wife living on the grounds of the temple and monastery. So there's a lot more variety in all this than we knew years ago. And there's even distinctions between, you know, temples and monasteries. And often many monasteries have temples also. Not all temples have monasteries. And the priests in Japan tended to serve the temples, which tended to serve a wider lay community. And the monasteries, for various interesting historical, political reasons in China, moved to the mountains to get away from all the negative influences of the daily fashions in politics and the alignments of the Confucians and the Taoists and the Buddhists always vying for political favor. Early Zen people were like, yeah, enough of that. Let's get out of here to the hills. And that continued in Japan and Korea as well. But then dramatically, priest form was developed in the 19th century when Japan was reforming itself. And this is what I know about the Soto tradition. There's other variations, but in the mid-19th century, after Admiral Perry's visitation to Tokyo Bay, in which he forced the country open to trade, that caused what they call the Meiji Reformation, which Japan kind of reformed itself. A reformation forced on itself by outside forces to modernize, be ready for the modern West to be coming more frequently and in greater numbers. So one thing they reformed was the monk and nunhood, and they created the Soto Zen sector, and they made all the monks into priests, and the priests had the option to marry if they wish. And that had good and negative connotations. One, further embedded them into lay communities, but then it kind of, in some instances, created kind of a family heritage of temples, like passing your temple down through your lineage, your blood lineage, rather than your dharmic lineage, which could take all kinds of shapes. But it prepared it in a way for coming to the West and meeting this culture which has no idea about monastic tradition, really, or vague memories of it. Now we have a kind of interesting spectrum of practice in the West. Like I spent 3 months in a monastery, and I would spend more if I could arrange it, but that's not everybody's cup of tea either. So it's good training, particularly for a priest, to be immersed in practice like that, and day in and day out. I call that Tassajara in the wilderness in Central California, kind of a postmodern village life. And it was a bit more rustic even than our state parks maybe, but very intimate. So you begin to know everybody's bathroom and farting patterns and how much they like to eat or don't, and everything. It was a big family unit, 65 people in that practice period. But really opens compassionate heart. So but that's the basic. Do you have another thought or comment about that?
No, but thank you.
Yeah, because you do sometimes, and that gets all muddled too in American culture. So one Soto priest I know will call himself the punk monk. Brad Warner, who's written some somewhat entertaining books, but he kind of muddles that up. They call himself a monk, and he's not really a monk. He barely spent any time in a monastery. But it's a funny rhyme, so. All right. Thank you so much for your warm and kind attention, and hope to see you again. Anytime you come to Richmond, please drop in. Our center is very close to the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, which also has some pretty lovely Buddhist artifacts there. Wonderful to see, and all kinds of stuff.
Is your website list like those times?
Yes, so richmondzen.org. And there's a variety of resources you can find there.
Before you disperse, wanted to give you an opportunity, if it's within your means and if you wish to donate in support of our guest speaker today, and also in support of the technology, et cetera, that the Sangha uses to have these events. You're not under any obligation. This is a free event, but if you wish to make a contribution, there's a basket there. There's a QR code, which is a new thing we're doing. You can scan it with your telephone camera, and it'll take you to the spot online where you can donate electronically. And for folks online, WilliamsburgBuddhistSangha.org and the donate button in the top right corner. So,
and I'll just add to that, just for me, your presence was a gift, so thank you.
Invite her.
Right. All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Be well, be safe.
What is the name of the place where you live? Where the Richmond Zen.org?
The website is richmondzen.org,
What's the place?
and then the place is, our temple is Ekoji Buddhist Sangha of Richmond.
It's supposed to carry.
Somewhat long.
Okay.
Yeah, it's on Grove Avenue near the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, but you can find it through the website.